Hi guys, so today we are going to be talking about percent, proportions, and equations. So we will be given 3 pieces of information and we will have to figure out the last part. So remember with proportions, we were given 3 numbers and then we had to find the missing variable, and we solved that by using cross products. So that is one way that I will be teaching this to you guys, is by using a proportion. And this is the formula that you guys are going to have to remember when we talk about these types of questions. So the formula is over of equals percent over 100, or you can think of it as the part over the total over percent over 100. So let's think about this equation. So percents are always out of 100, right? So if you were to get an A+ on a test, that means that you got 100%. If you only got an 87%, that means that you got an 87% over 100%, because the highest that you can get on a test is 100%, but if you only got an 87, that means that you got an 87 over 100. So that's why this right side of the equation is true, because percents are always out of 100, so just think of a test. And then it kind of goes off of our left side of the equation as well, talking about part over total. So if I had 10 apples and I only ate 5 of them, well, that means I ate 5 out of the 10 apples. So that's talking about the part over the total. So this is what we are going to use for part of our problems down here, and then I can teach you guys a different way as well, and that is by using an equation. So the equation is talking about the percent, so whatever percent it is, times the whole, or in other words, the total, and then it's going to equal the part. So we always talk about percent of the whole is the part. Or if you're not using total and part, you can think of it as percent times of equals is. So I recommend the proportion way. This is just the way that I have always done it, but I will teach you guys both of them, and then you guys can decide which one you like better, okay? So when we say what number is 20% of 110, anytime that you guys see the is, of, and percents, this is when you guys need to think of these 2 equations up here, the formulas. So we're trying to figure out what number is. So whenever you see is, think of our proportion. So is was talking about the numerator, so that means that we're trying to find the part. So what number is 20%? There's our percent sign, so we know percents are always out of 100%. And then of 110. So this is telling us that our of, the total, is talking about the 110. So if I were to set up my proportion and solve this, again, percents are always out of 100, so if we're talking about 20%, my right side of my formula, or of the proportion, is going to be 20% of 100. And then, like I said, what number is 20%? We are trying to find the is here. And then the of 110, if you notice, the 110 is right after the of, which means that this 110 is talking about the total. So I'm going to plug in 110 for of in my formula. So that's on the denominator in the bottom. And then we're trying to figure out what number is. So x goes in the numerator there. And then after you set up your proportion, you're just going to use your cross products to solve. So cross products, 100 times x, or x times 100 will give us 100x. And then multiply your other diagonals. 110 times 20 gives us 2,200. And then your last step to get x by itself, right now the 100 and x are multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying is to divide, to move that 100 over here. So when I divide, 2,200 divided by 100 gives me x equals 22. So if I were to put this back into my problem, I could say 22 is 20% of 110. Now that was the proportion way, but remember I told you guys that there's also an equation way as well. And the thing about this equation is your percent needs to be a decimal. So anytime that you're trying to multiply with percents, you always need to first change your percent into a decimal. And we have talked about how to do this on one of your lessons a couple days ago. And then you can start plugging it into the equation and solve. So if our equation is the percent times the whole, well, they told us that our percent was 20%. So if I want to change 20% into its decimal form, remember there's an imaginary decimal at the end of a whole number. And to change a percent to a decimal, you move it to the left 2 times. So 20% as a decimal is 0.20. And we are going to multiply that times the whole, or the total, or the of. And again, 110 was talking about the of, so I'm going to plug in 110 and for the whole in our formula. And then it's going to equal the part. And remember, the part was what we were trying to find, or in other words, the is. So that's going to be my variable. So x is already by itself, and it's telling me that all I have to do is multiply these two numbers together. So if I take 0.20 times 110, because remember a number shoved up next to parentheses means multiply, I would get the answer of 22 again. So this way obviously was a lot faster because it only took one step to get to our answer. This way we had to cross multiply and then divide to get our answer. However, whenever students use this formula, one of two things happens. One, they forget to change percents to decimals. Or two, you guys will figure out over here that students feel like they should just multiply every time to get their answer, but when you're trying to find the percent, or you're trying to find the whole part, your operation is to divide. So students get mixed up whenever they use this formula. So that's why I prefer the proportions, but again, it's up to you guys whichever one you prefer. Okay, so let's try another one. So what percent of 150 is 90? So if you see here what percent, that means that that is going to represent our variable x, because we are trying to find what percent of a number is a number. So if I were to use my proportion, remember percents are always out of 100. So this number in your denominator is always going to be 100 because, once again, percents are always out of 100. So if I'm trying to find what percent, that means that my variable is going to go above the 100, since that's what I'm trying to find. And then our other numbers are going to go over here. We just need to figure out where do they belong. Well, what percent of 150, and if you look, of is before the 150, so most of the time, probably 9 times out of 10, whatever word is before the number is going to be what is represented. So of 150 is 90, so there's the word is, so once again that number behind it is going to represent the word before it. But you could also think of it as the part over the whole. So if we had 150 and then we also had 90, well, 90 is part of 150, which means 150 is our total, so that would be our denominator number, and then 90 would be our part, or the is. So again, I'm just plugging in numbers where they belong in the formula. Is, or the part, was on top, and of, or the total, was on bottom, so that's why 90 went on top, since that was the is, and 150 went on bottom because that was the of. After you set it up, you can now cross multiply. So 150 times x is 150x. 90 times 100 is 9,000. And then to get x by itself, we need to move this 150 over to the other side. And to do that, we are going to do the inverse operation. Right now, the 150 and the x are multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying is to divide. And if you were to take 9,000 divided by 150, you get x equals 60. And remember, this was talking about what percent, so our value is going to be 60%. and this is my answer. All right, so now let's try the equation way. So again, our formula is the percent times the whole equals part, or percent times of equals is. We're trying to figure out the percent, so where my percent is in my formula, I'm going to put a variable x since that's what I'm trying to find. Next, we're going to multiply that times the total, or the of, which in that case we already talked about was the 150, and then our is, or the part, was 90. So if you notice, we need to get x by itself, so just like we did over here, the opposite of multiplying a number is to divide it to move it over to the other side. So if I want to get x by itself, I need to divide by this 150 on both sides. So 150 divided by 150 cancels because that equals 1, so I'm left with x equals. And then when you guys take 90 divided by 150 in your calculator, you get 0.6. So let's look at our two answers. Here I got 0.6, but over here I got 60. So I want you guys to think about, are these the same answers, or how can I get my 0.6 to equal that 60%? So remember, we're trying to figure out a percent. Right now, this is not a percent. This is represented as a decimal. So to get it into its percent form, I need to move my decimal point to the right 2 times and then fill in the 0 in that empty space so that now we get our percentage to be equal to each other. Alright, so those were the two different ways to solve these type of problems. You guys pick if you rather do proportions or if you rather do equations. I am going to do proportions, but I will try to show the equation way as well, just in case you guys need to see it. But as you guys can see with the equation way, you're going to have to move decimal points to get percents to decimals into the formula, or if you're trying to find the percent, you need to get the decimal point back into its percent form. However, if you do proportions, you don't have to change anything. Okay, so let's try a couple more problems here. So the number 117 is 45% of what number? So I always like to start with the percent in my proportion because that's the easiest to figure out, because obviously percents are shown with the percent sign. So in our formula, is over of equals percent over 100. Remember, 100 is always on the bottom because percents are always out of 100. And if we had 45%, I'm going to put 45 on top since that was my percent over 100. Now I just need to figure out the left side of my proportion. So it says the number 117 is, so there's that word is, and then we're trying to figure out of what number. So of what number is what we're trying to find. So I'm trying to figure out the total, or in other words, the of. So since our formula is over of, I'm going to put the variable down here since that's what we're trying to find. And then the 117 was talking about the is, or in other words, the part. So 117 goes on top in the numerator. So after you solve it, we can go ahead and cross multiply. So 45 times x is 45x. 117 times 100 is 11,700. And to get x by itself, our last step is to divide by that 45 on both sides. And I get an answer of 260. So if I were to plug my answer back into our equation or into our sentence, this would say the number 117 is 45% of 260. If you wanted to do it the equation way, you would have our percent. Remember, you have to change it to a decimal first, so you need to move your decimal point to the left 2 times. So 45% as a decimal is 0.45. And then you always multiply it times the whole, or the of, and that's what we were trying to find. So I'm going to multiply it times our variable x. and then it should equal 117. So to get x by itself, you need to move that 0.45 by using the inverse operation, which is dividing. And then if you were to take 117 divided by 0.45 in your calculator, you would get that 260 again. So again, you just had to do it one way. Just pick whichever way you feel the most comfortable with. All right, so let's try one more here. So 130 is 65% of what number? So 130 is 65% of what number? So again, I'm going to start with my proportion. And in this proportion, remember, percents are always out of 100. So 100 is always going to be the number down here at the bottom. And they told us that our percent was 65, so I'm going to put the percent over 100 where it belongs. And then we just need to figure out the left side over here. So the left side, we have 130 is, so 130 is talking about the part, or the is. So remember, our formula is over of equals percent over 100, so the is goes in the numerator over here. And then we're trying to figure out of what number. So of is the denominator, and that's what we're trying to find. After you set up your proportion, we can go ahead and solve. So 65 times x is 65x. 130 times 100 is 13,000. And then your last step to get x by itself is to divide by 65 on both sides. And 13,000 divided by 65 gives me an answer of 200. And then if you were doing the equation way, remember you want to first change your percent to a decimal. So move your decimal point to the left 2 times. So 65% as a decimal is 0.65. You're going to multiply it times your of, which was what we're trying to find. And then it's going to equal to the part. So to get x by itself, you just need to divide by that 0.65 on both sides. And if you were to take 130 divided by the 0.65, you should get that value of 200. All right, so now I want you guys to try some on your own. So I'm going to give you guys 2 problems to do. And here are the 2 problems. So if you guys can go ahead and pause this video, try out these 2 problems on your own, and then hit the play button when you are ready for the answer. So go ahead and pause your video and work on these 2 questions. All right, so you guys should be done with those 2 questions. So let's go through it. So 48 is 40% of what number? So if you were doing the proportion way, percents are always out of 100, and they told you that the percent was 40, so 40 should have been over that 100 there. And then 48 was talking about the is, or in other words, the part. So remember, our formula is over of percent over 100. So 48 should have went on top, and then the of should have went on bottom. And after you set up your proportion, you can now just cross multiply. So 40 times x is 40x. 48 times 100 is 4,800. And then to get x by itself, you just need to divide by 40. And you should have got an answer of 120. And then if you did the equation way, you should have had the equation 0.40 times x equals 48. And then your step would be to divide by that 0.40 on both sides. So then 48 divided by 0.40 should have given you that 120. All right, and then number 2, what percent of 25 is 10? So again, your formula is over of equals percent over 100, or the part over the whole. So we're trying to find what percent. So we need to have our variable over the 100, since this is talking about our percent. And then of 25 is 10. Well, 10 is part of 25, so 10 is going to represent our is, and then 25 is going to represent the total. or the of. So this is how your proportion should have been set up. Cross multiply, so 25 times x is 25x. 10 times 100 is 1,000. And then if you were to divide both sides by 25, you should get an answer of x equals 40. And remember, we're trying to find the percent, so this should be 40%. And then if you set this up as an equation, you are trying to find the percent, so it should have been x times the whole, or 25, and then equals the is, or the part, which was 10. So to get x by itself, you should have divided by 25 on both sides. So 10 divided by 25 should have given you 0.4, but remember that's the decimal form and you need it to be a percent. So 0.4 as a decimal is the same thing as 40%. So good job if you got those. We are going to move on to some word problems with the part over whole equals percent over 100. So this is how we can relate it to real life. So example 1 says 45% of the trees in a park are maple trees. There are 27 maple trees in the park. How many trees are in the park in all? So we are trying to figure out how many trees are in the park in total. So if you think of our formula, notice how on the front side we always saw the words is, of, and the percent. However, in this problem, do we see any is or ofs? We do see a percent, but we don't see any number that's talking about the is or the of. So when we are dealing with word problems, if you're using the proportion like I do, you want to start thinking of it as the part over the whole. Because for this problem here, there's 27 maple trees, and that makes up 45% of the trees. And we're trying to figure out how many trees are in the park in all. Well, in all means the total. So if we're trying to find the total, that means that our denominator in our proportion is what we're trying to find. So x is going to be my variable since we're trying to figure out how many trees are in the park in total, which is talking about the whole. They're telling us that 27 of the trees in the park are maple trees. So that's talking about part of the trees. So that's going to be represented as my numerator. And then our percent is 45% of the trees are maple trees. So that's our percent over 100. So this is how we would set it up. And after you set it up, hopefully you guys feel comfortable with cross products now. So 45 times x is 45x. 27 times 100 is 2700, and then you can divide both sides by that 45 to get x by itself, and then 2700 divided by 45 gives you 60. And remember, since these are now word problems, we need to label our variable or our unit. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about trees, so x would equal 60 trees. And I would go back and double check to make sure that this makes sense. So if 45% of the trees are maple trees and there's 27 maple trees, we need to figure out how many of them were in the park total. So if you had 60 trees to begin with and 45% of them are maple trees, then that means that the 27 is smaller than 60, so that makes sense about why it was talking about the is. So we know we did this correct. And remember, you could do this the equation way as well. So if you did the equation, remember to turn that percent into a decimal, and your equation should have been set up like this. Okay. All right, guys, next one. Students are auditioning for a school play. Only 18 out of the 45 students that audition will get a part in the play. What percent of the students who audition will get a part in the play? So again, our formula is the is over of equals percent over 100, but when we're dealing with story problems like this, you want to think of it as the part over the whole instead of the is over the of. So the two numbers that they gave us was the 18 out of 45. So let's think which number is talking about the part and which number is talking about the whole. Well, there's 45 students total and only 18 out of the 45 that population will get a part in the play. So that means that 45 is talking about everybody and 18 is only talking about part. So when I put it in my proportion over here, since the part is on top, the numerator, that means 18 will go on top since that's talking about part of the students. And then 45 was talking about all of them, so that will be our denominator. So now we can just figure out what percent out of 100 represents 18 out of 45. So after you set up your proportion, you can cross multiply. So 45 times x is 45x. 18 times 100 is 1800. And then your last step to get x by itself is to divide by 45. And our percentage comes out to be 40% after you take 1800 divided by 45. And then if you set this up as an equation, you should have had x times 45 equals 18. And then when you divide it by 45 on both sides, 18 divided by 45 should have given you 0.4. But remember, you have to change it to its percent form. So move your decimal point to the right 2 times, and that would give you that 40%. All right, so I want you guys to try this next one. So go ahead and pause the video. And when you are finished with the problem, click play and then see if you got the correct answer or not. So go ahead and pause the video and try out this next question. All right, so the first lap of an auto race is 2,500 meters. This is 10% of the total race distance. What is the total race distance? So hopefully that word total helps you out on what we're trying to figure out. So again, our proportion is the part over whole equals percent over 100, or is over of equals percent over 100. And they told us that our percentage is 10, and that's representing 10% of the total, which is 2,500 meters. So our 10 is the percent, so it's going to be over that 100. And then since we're trying to figure out the total, that means that we're trying to figure out the whole. So your x should have been in the denominator, and then the 2,500 should have been in the numerator, since 2,500 was only representing the first lap and not all of it. So after you cross multiply, 10 times x is 10x. 2,500 times 100 is 250,000. And then your last step to get x by itself is to divide by 10. And the distance of the entire race should have been 25,000 meters. All right, so that's today's lesson. This is what we call percent proportion, or percent proportion equation if you're using the equation method. So the main thing here to remember is when we're trying to figure out the part of something or the whole of something with a percentage involved, you guys need to think of our formula of the percent over, or the is over of equals percent over 100, or thinking about it as the part over the whole. So on your guys' homework tonight, you need to use this formula to help you set up the problems. So like on the front, is and ofs were involved, but on the back with word problems, they were not. So you just need to remember is over of and part over total. Or you can use the equation way as well. Just remember, percent needs to be changed to a decimal first before you multiply. And then if you're trying to find the percent, your answer is going to be a decimal, and then you need to move your decimal point to get it to a percent. So if you guys have any questions, make sure you let your teacher know, but then go ahead and start working on your homework.